Is December 22nd, 2020. This is the meeting of the Legislative Affairs. The agenda item for tonight is Bundle 1 of Phase 2 of zoning changes. That's the sole item on the agenda this evening. We have Councilor Zarella and Councilor Schultz present this evening. And also present is Mr. Thomas Swarovski, and he's going to present the changes, the zoning changes to us. And at this point, Tom, I will turn the meeting over to you.
All right, great. Thank you all for having me this evening. I'm going to try to work my screen share here. As Councilor Walsh had indicated, can everyone see this okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So today I'll be talking about the first bundle of our Phase 2 zoning changes. And just as a quick reminder, we've been working at this for just over a year now. We've got a 20-member plus advisory committee, 12-member working group, and it's a two-phase process. The first phase the council had approved this summer. Those changes were really more administrative in nature, removing inconsistencies and errors, redundancies, condensing and clarifying the ordinance. We've got that out of the way, and now we're on to Phase 2, which is more of the transformative. The map changes, the major use, and this is one minor change from when we last spoke in Legislative Affairs. I had anticipated in the fall that you all would receive Phase 2 in one big package. And I think in conversations with our advisory committee, the working group, and the planning board, the determination was made to actually break it up into 3 bundles. This will be happening in rapid succession each and every month. So it's not gonna, we're not gonna drag this thing out forever, but we thought for purposes of deliberation, it made more sense to break things up. So we're not here for a 4 or 5 hour meeting going through all these changes. I think it could be exhausting for everyone involved. So just to give you a quick overview of the next bundles, bundle 2 would probably go to a hearing in late January that covers accessory dwelling units, infill development, agricultural and uses, multifamily development, drive-throughs, off-street parking, signage, and regulations related to the RC district, which is our most dense residential district. Bundle 3, which would then be the following month, would cover industrial districts, map changes, dimensional changes, and other unaddressed items. And then the end goal would be to wrap all of that up, the public hearing phase in February, and then send it to its readings in March and April. So to go on now to Bundle 1, which I know you all had received in your packet, and I think it would make sense here, and Councilor Walsh and Zarella and I were discussing breaking things up for voting purposes into each of these discrete sections. What you see here on the PowerPoint is a bit out of order from how it was reported or sent to you in your package. So I apologize for that. I think what I wanted to do here was really work from least complex to most complex item. So hopefully we can follow along, and apologies if it's a bit confusing to follow. But for the Phase 2 purpose statement revisions, this doesn't change anything in our ordinance yet from a practical matter, but what it does is set the stage for the next round of changes. And basically we added a new purpose statement to say that our central business district will become the business district, which is something we've talked about quite a bit previously. We're moving to a place where we want to have one downtown business district, and then anything else that was previously a central business district designation, such as John Fitch, certain smaller pockets of Water Street, right off of 5th Street. There's a number of CBD neighborhoods that are now going to be finding themselves with a new designation that more accurately conveys what they are. So downtown business district will be downtown, and the language reflects that. The neighborhood business district is really, those are the areas that are business districts, just like it sounds, within a neighborhood. So, there are uses that really retain that more pedestrian oriented scale. They are uses that wouldn't run afoul to the neighborhood that surrounds it. And then the commercial district is really intended to be more of a kind of catch-all commercial district, if you will. These are things that have a more auto-oriented use as opposed to a downtown, which would be more pedestrian-oriented in nature. So these are really just purpose statements to state, this is what we are the key commercial districts. We'll get to industrial. But if we can then agree to that, that'll kind of affect the map changes you'll see later on. So I'll leave it at that if folks have any questions.
Questions from councilors? Councilor Zarella?
I just wanted to note that I can't remember if we discussed this as in the council before, but the functional use of these purpose descriptions will be so that if the planning board or the zoning board or the council for that matter, and the few things that still come to us, has to make any sort of discretionary decision based on what's appropriate to the neighborhood or whatever, then we have clear guidance as to this is what this neighborhood should be. So for example, if you're in a commercial district and someone says, well, I don't want you to approve the used car lot because it's right next to my apartment building, then we know to say, well, you've got an apartment building in a commercial district, your use is not primary, so you've got to deal with it. Whereas if it's a neighborhood business district, then would say, oh, well, if this is going to interfere with the nearby neighborhood, that's a problem, so let's nix it. And that goes beyond just the substantive requirements of each district. It's actually very helpful.
Okay. All right. And so we would, and thank you for that clarification, because I think that's helpful. So we would need a vote on approving the purpose statement revision as well, right? So can we do this by unanimous consent on all of these, or would you prefer a vote? I think unanimous consent is probably the way to go. So unless I see anyone, like raising their hands and protesting, I will just say that this has been approved 3-0 by unanimous consent.
Oh, just really briefly.
Yeah.
Just so that it's clear to the rest of the council what exactly we're voting on, do you have the text of these revisions in your PowerPoint, Tom? Just so that we can say it's pages this to this of the packet.
I have it pulled up separately. So were we to go to that's page 4.
Okay, so page 4 of the packet. Just to
4.
clarify.
Okay.
Yep.
Excellent.
I'll include that in the minutes. Okay. Thank you. Good point, Counselor. Thank you. All right, Tom, why don't you go ahead to your next,
Sure.
The next section?
Merging of non-conforming lots. So our current zoning ordinance says merging non-conforming lots shall be considered merged for zoning purposes. And basically, we don't have this clause that says merging of non-conforming lots held in common ownership. So conceivably, one could read the zoning ordinance. This is really arcane, but to say if two people, one party owns one lot, one party owns another, they could be considered merged for zoning purposes. This just clarifies that it's actually non-conforming lots held in common ownership. So if the same party owns both of them, they'd be considered merged for zoning purposes.
Okay. Councilor Zarella?
I'd like to, I'm not going to make it as a motion just yet in case anyone has better suggestions, but I'd like to suggest that we add or rather that we reword it saying that this applies not only to two non-conforming lots that are contiguous to one another, but also to a non-conforming lot contiguous to a conforming lot. In other words, if you have a conforming lot and you come into ownership of a little piece of land along the edge of it, that little piece of land merges in with your lot, even though one lot is conforming.
Okay, so can you give me the language again? It applies to two, what did you say?
Let's see, let me just pull up the right page so that I have the existing language. That's page 18. So currently it says contiguous non-conforming lots held in common ownership shall be considered merged for zoning purposes. I would suggest amending that to say any non-conforming lot held in common ownership with a contiguous lot shall be considered merged for zoning purposes.
So any non-conforming lot held in common ownership with a conforming lot?
Contiguous lot.
Contiguous lot, that's, sorry, I can't read my own writing.
It's quite all right. I can't read mine either.
Okay,
So I guess in that case, I will make that as a motion.
do I have
To
a
amend.
second?
Second.
Okay, and I guess since there's a motion and a second, I'm assuming that, that by unanimous consent that that's approved. And that's on page 18, you said, Counselor Zarilla?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, Mr. Skorowski, you may go to the next section.
All righty, a floodplain amendment. This is, we were told to do this by the state, to be frank. By DCR and by extension FEMA, essentially this is the component of our ordinance that's required for us to participate in the floodplain insurance program. We had language existing. These tweaks were proposed by DCR to conform with state and federal guidelines. We did not draft these. We just used the zoning ordinance update as an opportunity to include this in the changes.
Okay. Questions?
Motion to
what-
approve.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and second. Seeing no objections, I will say that that is passed. What page is that on? Does anyone have that handy?
That is 19 through 25.
19 to 25. Thank you. All right.
All righty.
Mr. Skorowski.
The next amendment is one that I think is going to save us all some headaches in the future, but basically it allows the community development and planning director to update figures, photos, scrivener's errors, etc., with majority approval of the planning board. And actually, as I'm saying that, I realize one amendment that's needed to be community development and planning, not planning and community development. But this is exactly the kind of thing that were this to be approved, I could just fix this with the planning board's approval instead of having to go through the entire zoning amendment process. This is really for minor errors that need to be resolved to streamline that process a bit.
I think that makes sense. Councilor Zarella?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and make your.
Okay, so first, just I wanted to confirm with Tom. You said majority approval. The ordinance here says 2/3 majority. Was that intended to be changed, or?
It does now, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I'm basing it off of what happened before it got to the planning board. I think that's the language that it was at, and then the planning board requested it be a 2/3 majority.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just make a technical motion to amend planning and community development to community development and planning.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right.
And then I also, go ahead.
Should we, and why don't we vote on that? So the amendment by unanimous consent will pass. 3-0. Okay, and your second point, Counselor?
Yeah, I think I'm very much in favor of this change. I think it will save us a ton of headaches. But at the same time, I think the council needs to be kept abreast of any changes that are being made, rather than relying on our initiative to go and check the zoning ordinance and see if it's been tweaked. So I would suggest I put together some draft language here. That the planning board, that you don't have to write this down verbatim, I'm just throwing it out there for people to think about. The planning board shall transmit to the council a report of any such clerical changes made. Such report shall be accepted without debate at the following council meeting unless any councillor shall make a motion to contest the changes. If such motion is made and seconded, it shall be voted without debate, and if it passes, the matter shall be placed on the agenda for the next following meeting, when it shall be considered without the need for referral to any committee, though such referral may still be made by motion or unanimous consent. Basically, it's saying we automatically approve it unless someone really, really doesn't want to.
Yeah.
So it serves the same purpose, but
I have a
with an
question.
option for us to object if we have a problem with it.
Okay, Counselor Schultz?
Yeah, I had a question, Tom, about the 2/3 approval, and you've got majority approval. What was the thinking that you needed 2/3 approval? It seems to me majority approval would be good enough, but.
So 2/3 approval is what's needed for any zoning change, a supermajority in effect. This is something that's been done in a lot of other communities, because this is such a unique case where it's not really, we're not talking about a zoning change. We're talking about literally dotting I's and crossing T's.
Yeah.
So I think originally it was brought to the planning board as a majority, and that's where my head still is, and that's why you see it there on the PowerPoint. That was a mistake. But I think the planning board still wanted to retain the 2/3 majority.
Did they explain that justification, Tom, at all? Or?
I think just because that's how zoning changes are traditionally made. So it's sort of in keeping with the status quo, if you will.
Yeah, well, maybe the status quo could be changed this time and just make it majority, but go ahead. Councilor Zarella, I guess.
Counselor Zarella?
Yeah, I just suggest that, I mean, I see what you're saying, Councilor Schultz, that there's no reason to overcomplicate it. But given what this is meant to be used for, I would suggest that if it can't secure at least a 2/3 majority, then it probably means there's some dispute as to whether it really is just a clerical change versus something that actually substantively affects the rights and privileges of Fitchburg residents.
And that's what I was going to say, that I think that I think a 2/3 majority is probably not always going to be necessary, but I think having it there is probably a good idea. So,
I think
if I wield my powers irresponsibly.
Yes.
That's right. We have to keep Tom under control here. You know how wild he gets. So, Councilor Zarella, if you just want to say what your motion is again, and then you can send me the language later.
Sure. The motion is basically just to say that anytime the planning board makes any of these changes, they send a report to the council of what they changed. And the council automatically approves it with no debate or anything, unless a councillor feels that there's a problem, in which case there's a mechanism to quickly put it on for the next meeting so that we can deal with it and move on.
Okay. And that's your motion, Councilor Schultz. Do I hear a second?
Yes, second.
Okay. And again, this will be, unless there's an objection, this will be approved by unanimous consent. All right. All righty. And I'm just going to make a note, Councilor Zarella, that you'll send me that language.
Will do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys, phase 2 starts to get more exciting as we move on, I promise.
You kidding? This is thrilling already.
Maybe after this one. So one of the items that was brought up as a phase 2 or phase 1 item, more administrative in nature. I think I might have paused sharing. Um, yeah. Originally, we looked at merging the RA1 and RA2 district in phase one, but we weren't quite sure we were making the right decision and we wanted more time. Essentially, both districts have the same purpose: to establish and preserve quiet suburban neighborhoods, one-family homes free from other uses except those that are compatible with and convenient to residents of such districts. On the table of use regulations, there's no difference, so you can build the exact same kind of houses in each district. And there are slight changes in dimensional requirements, and that's it. They're otherwise identical, and having two different districts can make a more complicated zoning map that's more difficult for our building commissioner, planning staff, the layperson to understand. So our original thought was to merge them, but there were two slight differences here. The minimum lot area is slightly larger in RA1, but not significantly so. The minimum lot frontage is slightly larger as well in RA1. And so what we wanted to do was just kind of do a geographical analysis to see if we were making the right decision. And after looking at both of the districts, in partnership with our working group and Paula Karen, the planning board chair, it was determined that were we to move to the less restrictive of the two, it doesn't impact significantly any lots within each of these neighborhoods. So, we were worried that maybe there were some lots that would fall out of conformance with this, but we don't see that issue. And I think yes, Councilor Zarella?
Yeah, Councilor Zarella, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, just make sure that I'm hearing correctly, because the packet that got sent out looks like we're merging RA2 into RA1, and the way you're talking about it sounds like it too, but you mentioned the less restrictive requirements, which would be RA2. I just want to make sure we're going in the right direction here. Are we forcing RA2 to conform to the slightly more restrictive requirements of RA1 because it won't make any difference? Or are we relaxing the requirements of RA1 to go down to RA2? I think we had discussed the former in the working group, but I can't remember if that was what we settled on.
I'm trying to pull up the actual language here, Councilor. So, new share. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Thank you for bearing with me here. So this is how it looks. The new RA1 and RA2 would in effect become RA with 12,500 square feet and 100 lot frontage, as opposed to 15 and 125 in the RA1. So RA1 would fold into RA2.
Okay, that's what I thought we were doing, but the language in the packet says that we're deleting RA2 and relabeling RA1. So I'd like to move to amend to fix that language to say that we're deleting RA1 and relabeling RA2 as RA.
Oh, yeah. That's
So
just a typo.
So we're going
Thank you.
So
That's
in
section
other,
2 on
can I ask you a
page,
question, Councilor Zarella?
Oh, absolutely.
So what you're saying is we're going to be merging RA1 into RA2?
Yes, as opposed to the other way around.
Right. And what page is that?
That's page 2, and the language that needs to be amended is in section 2 at the very bottom of the page.
Can you show that, Tom? Okay.
Right here.
All right.
So basically just where it says RA2, it should say RA1 and vice versa.
Okay.
So, and Councilor Zarella, I think it was just, it's sort of semantics, because then if you get into the next one, it calls out the dimensional differences. So it was just picking which column to turn into RA, but it's a good clarification.
Okay. So we'll, so and before we move on, Counselor Schultz, did you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question. I just had a comment that I like the fact that, you know, these lots won't fall out, that you're going with the 12,500 in
Right.
the 100 minimum square footage for the frontage. I like that. So that, you know, they, you know, you'll be allowed to use that size lot. So I was going to make a motion to approve.
Okay, did you, Counselor Zarella, did you want to make a motion to amend?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to amend section 2 on page 2 to swap the two labels RA1 and RA2 within that single sentence.
Okay. And do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. And seeing no objection, that will pass by unanimous consent.
I will second Councillor Schultz's motion to approve the section. In its
Oh, yes,
entirety.
sorry, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think we need to vote on the motion to amend, and then we'll do the motion to approve. So I'm assuming that the motion to amend is going to be passed by unanimous consent, and then I have a second on Counselor Schultz's motion to approve by Counselor Zarella, and that will be adopted by unanimous consent as well.
Yeah.
All right.
So the next amendment, I'm pretty excited by. It's Artisan Food and Beverage and Artisan Manufacturing. And what, you know, it's sort of two separate items, but both fall under the same umbrella, if you will, that these are uses that traditionally we might think of as industrial, but they're not industrial in the traditional sense because they can be compatible with uses in other, you know, other residential uses or other commercial uses without the conflicts you might see with regard to noise, vibration, and so forth. So to start with Artisan Food and Beverage, this allows for breweries, distilleries, and bakeries. Zoning currently, we're silent on these items. And of course we have small bakeries, but not a sort of larger producer, if you will. And we also, of course, have breweries, but let's just say we were a bit flexible in our interpretation of our existing zoning, because one could make an argument that breweries are not allowed in the city right now under our current ordinance. These would be allowed by right in LI, limited industrial and industrial districts. Smaller breweries and distilleries and the like would be allowed by right if they were less than 7,500 square feet in the downtown business district, in the neighborhood business district, and in the commercial district. And just as a point of reference, River Styx would fall into that category, as would Green Road Brewery, the most recent one that was approved on Summer Street. And then special permit would be required in the RC district, in the mill conversion overlay district, in the FSU district, and anything greater than 7,500 square feet in the CBD, MBD, and commercial district. And then Artisan Manufacturing, same concept really, to allow for smaller scale manufacturing that contains a minimal negative externalities. So one great example locally is Teacher Lock. Teacher Lock is located at the old Sentinel building. They produce locks for classrooms in schools. They're a manufacturing enterprise, but not in the traditional sense, right? They're currently coexisting at the Upper Common in that bucolic setting, and nobody knows that a manufacturing enterprise is there. And that's the point of artisan manufacturing. Right. It's smaller scale, less intrusive manufacturing. So this would be allowed by right in the industrial, limited industrial, and the commercial district, and by right if it's less than 7,500 square feet in the downtown business district, in the FSU district, and then by special permit in the neighborhood business and the mill conversion overlay district.
I think this is an incredible addition. I think it makes sense. It allows for those really like niche, smaller businesses to move in and develop, and it allows a place for them. I think it makes sense. Councilor Schultz.
I agree with you, Councilor Walsh. It's great that we're gonna spell this out and encourage these businesses to come to Fitchburg. We need as many as we can get. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Zarella.
I also think this is an absolutely terrific change. I have just 3 very minor tweaks I'd like to see. One is purely technical, and actually I'd like to make a technical motion covering all of this proposed bundle that's in front of us, which is
Okay.
just to insert a reminder in the record to correct any remaining references to CBD, Central Business District, to read DBD, Downtown Business District. I know that's something Vinny will take care of when he's pulling together our final version. I just want to make sure that
Okay.
it does happen before we see a final ordinance.
Do you want to vote on all your motions separately, or just vote on all of them together?
If no one has any objection, I'll make it as a motion covering everything in front of us.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and make your amendments?
Oh,
make your
you
motion
mean that as opposed,
Yeah.
oh, I see.
Why don't you
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead and make your motions for all of your amendments, and then if we need to pull one out, we can.
Sure. Okay, so the second thing is on page 7 of the packet that we received. Standards 1616521. At the end of that paragraph, it says brewing and baking processes are exempt from the odor provision. Everyone see where that is? I'd like to suggest brewing, baking, and other cooking processes, just so that we're not inadvertently excluding other food preparation processes that we've neglected to think of.
Okay.
And
that was
then
and excuse me, Counselor, that was 165,621,
1816521, yes.
185.
181.6521.
Oh, 6521. Okay, thank you.
No problem. And then the last thing is just back on page 6, section 4, the purpose statement. I think this isn't necessarily something we can reword ourselves tonight. I think it takes a bit too much work, but it needs to be, I feel like, trimmed down significantly, because looking at the purpose statements we looked at for the commercial districts and for the residential A1 or residential A now, they're compact, they're tightly worded, they say exactly what we want to see and nothing else. This is an incredibly wordy pitch statement, basically, more than a purpose clause. It says what we're hoping to accomplish as like a 20-year plan. It says, it touts the virtues of artisan manufacturing. And I think it just really needs to be tightened up into 2 or 3 sentences maximum, saying exactly what we want to see in this district and leaving out everything else.
So,
Sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just going to ask if that is the kind of thing that I hear the charge loud and clear here. Before it went in front of the council, do you need particular language right now, or could we just go do that with the team at BSC?
Personally, I'm fine with either way. I mean, I don't think we should work out language right now, like the 3 of us, because I certainly don't have any language in mind, and I think that could bog us down. But I see Councilor Schultz may have something to input. I'd be happy to yield the floor to him.
I was going to
All
say,
right, Councilor Schultz, you can have the floor.
I looked at that purpose, and I think I agree with Councilor Zarella, but I think that's good information that I don't know if it could be placed somewhere in an introduction or something to the section. That'd be nice to keep it somewhere. Maybe not in that particular spot, but I think it would be nice to have that information, because it is a new something new to the city. So I think it would be good to have that somewhere. Do you agree with that, Tom?
Councilor Zarella?
I think it would be good to have it somewhere. I'm not sure it would be good to have it in the ordinance, only because the general presumption is that any language you put in an actual ordinance or legal enactment is meant to be substantive. It's meant to be functional and to actually
Right.
do something legally. So if we're not going to have it in the purpose statement, which, you know, we shouldn't, then it really shouldn't be in the ordinance itself. But certainly I think it should be publicized in some way, you know, Tom, through your office, or whatever, get it out to people that this is something we're doing and that we want to encourage, and let residents who aren't necessarily interested in participating still know that this is a type of business that we're looking to bring, you know, to bring to the city, and what, you know, the things that are good about it and so forth. I agree with Councilor Schultz on that note.
I
do
think that one of the things that always happens is that there's some discussion at city council meetings or you know, legislative affairs meetings, and there's a presentation. I think the legislative history, it could be mentioned and covered in that, and then it would be in the minutes of those meetings, and certainly someone could go back and say, okay, looking at the legislative history, this was the purpose. You know, the purpose statement is very short, but if you look at the legislative history, this is what they were thinking when it was passed. So I think that would be adequate to cover it. I would think. Tom, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm willing to take it back to the drawing board and figure this one out. I appreciate, you know, what Councilor Schultz had said, because there is some benefit to sort of a layperson or someone else really, or even a developer who doesn't know, oh, we're talking about breweries here, and like exactly what we're trying to accomplish here is really important, and I hope that can stay through in some way. But I'm sure we could accomplish it in a rewrite.
Okay, Councilor Zarella.
Just as an initial, I'm just glancing through this to try and cut down on the amount of work that you'll need to do on this, Tom. I think a first cut would just be to cut off everything after where it says 1 to 30 employees. Everything after that is essentially pitch language rather than purpose language. And then you've got less that you need to try and condense in the first few sentences.
Okay. Consider it done.
All right, so I have a motion by Councilor Zarella to amend, a technical motion to amend to correct any mention of CBD to change that to DBD, right?
Yep.
A motion on page 7 to change the standards 181.6521 to include brewing, baking, and other cooking processes. And then on page 6, amend the purpose to be a little more compact so that it's more traditional ordinance language and less explanatory language.
I'd like to pull out that last one and have that be pulled out, because I really think it should be somewhere, and maybe it can be condensed that you know, that it can retain that the essential idea there of what, you know, because I think that, you know, what you said earlier, Councilor Walsh, about you know, it can be in the history of the legislation. I really think it should be readily accessible to the developers, the people that are going to come in and start these businesses. So I'd like to see that you know, retained somehow, and you know, really work the language so that we retain some of that essential information. So because it is a new, you know, new part of our you know, the businesses we're trying to attract. So I kind of agree with Tom that it really is something that is needed, but you know, that's why I'd rather not see it taken out altogether. And,
well, Councilor Schultz, I think the only amendment is only to make to give Tom an opportunity to rework it, and
okay.
and the amendment is not to change the wording tonight, but just to give Tom an opportunity to go back and reword it.
All right,
Would you be comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with that. I just wanted to
Okay.
make that clear, my intention that is
Yeah.
to have.
And I understand, and I think that I think what's there is important. I agree with Councilor Zarella. I'm not sure it belongs in an ordinance.
Maybe it can be like a down at the bottom of the page or something and in smaller type. I don't know. I mean,
Well, we'll let Tom take a crack at it, and then we'll see what he comes up with, and we'll revisit it when it comes before us.
And certainly for marketing in the future, it's
right.
it's good to retain. So
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
And it could also and I know that there are going to be special permits, so it could also be included in the special permit language as well.
Yeah.
So I have a motion, and do I hear a second on
I'll
Councilor
second
Zarella's motion?
with that, the thought.
And so if no one, I know this is a little more complex, but if I don't see an objection, we'll take this by unanimous consent. All right, I don't see an objection, so we'll do that. All right, Mr. Skolarski, you're on a roll.
So far, so good.
Yep.
I'm on a roll, but my technology is not cooperating anymore.
Uh-oh.
Let me try again. Oh, you guys are seeing things that I'm not. Okay. Temporary storage. This merely regulates the use of temporary storage containers by time, appearance, use, and location. You often will see these in, an active construction site when a home is being built, or let's say if there's a fire in a property and there needs to be temporary living conditions, that's allowable through Mass General Law. What we don't want to see is a temporary storage container that becomes a permanent storage container, or a temporary storage container that is in disrepair, or a temporary storage container that's used for a house, or all of those things that you could think of were this amendment to go awry. That's what this is really trying to regulate for.
Okay. Questions? Councilor Zarella?
I just want to note that this is badly needed. We've had a couple of these come in front of the zoning board in the last year or two. And, we've had very little that we can actually do about it because we haven't been able to point to anything specific that says you can't do this.
Right.
So I think this is well drafted, and if no one else has any comments, I'm happy to make a motion to approve.
And I'll second that motion.
All right. And seeing no objections, we will, by unanimous consent, it will be approved. All right.
So the next one up is solar arrays, solar farms, and currently our zoning is silent on the matter. And in a lot of other instances, if we don't say anything in our zoning, it's presumed that it is not allowed. Solar is different because of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3, that actually says you cannot place unreasonable regulation and burden on the production of solar facilities. I'm paraphrasing there, but more or less. So if we didn't have it in our zoning, the determination was made that it was presumed allowable by site plan review, just by right. So what this amendment would do would essentially regulate it by providing conditions by which this is acceptable, by stating which districts it's allowable, which districts it's allowable by right, which districts it's allowable by special permit, and creating a series of conditions around the use itself. So again, it's adding regulations where it didn't exist for, we often come across in the planning board, and I'm sure as city councilors, you all have heard this, where residents would complain about a large solar farm in their backyard, particularly in a rural residential district. They are not always in keeping with the rural character of the northern parts of the city in particular, which is where we often see them. So this is an attempt to regulate that.
Okay. Questions? Council Zarella.
This one, to be honest, this one is the one where I have the largest number of small nitpicks and so forth. So I will, at any time, if either of my fellow counselors have something else they would like to say, please break in and, tell me to sit down. So,
Actually,
But-
Counselor, when you present them, if you could just tell me what page you're referring to, and then I'll note the page number in the minutes as well.
absolutely.
Okay.
So page 8, item number 1, the table of uses. I think that we need to figure out some language, and this is something that we definitely want to kick over to the city solicitor, but figure out some language that inverts the presumption on special permits when it comes to rural residential. Because normally a special permit is a presumptive grant. In other words, the granting authority is supposed to say yes unless they have a very clear and specific reason for saying no. And in most of the districts that we're allowing this, commercial, light industrial, FSU, that makes perfect sense for solar installations. But in rural residential, for the reasons that Tom was talking about, I think we really need to have a mechanism that says to the planning board, yes, you can say no just because it doesn't feel right for the neighborhood to you, or just because the person who's proposing it has not convinced you that they're going to do a good job with it, or something like that. But we would need specific language for that, because that's contrary to the usual presumptions of a special permit.
Okay.
Page 8, number 4, the term basic characteristics in the first sentence is completely undefined, and I think it badly needs some definition, because at the moment, basically anything could be argued either way to say that it does or does not change the basic characteristics of a building or structure. I mean, what is basic? Is the external footprint basic? Is the silhouette against the skyline basic? Is the amount of drain on city utilities basic? What are we talking about here? So I don't have any specific ideas for what should or should not be included. I'd have to see a proposal, but I think we need something, or at least or maybe just to change the term entirely to specify what it is that we're talking about.
And again, I think that this can be something that can be either through the city solicitor or through Tom and his group can be worked out at some date. I don't know that we need to.
Oh, absolutely.
I think we can raise the issues without solving the problems at the same time.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I'm not proposing that we need to resolve this as a committee or as a council after the
Right.
holidays. Simply that this is something I'd like to see us very clearly send to to Tom and to Vinny and say, this is something we're going to want to see in the final ordinance.
Okay.
And I've already talked with Tom about it. This is by no means meant to be, a scolding of Tom Skorowski or anything. I think he's done an excellent job pulling all of this together. This is just stuff that, last minute tweaks that need to be made to make it a good final product.
Right. And I think too that I think everyone understands that the first time that, and I know this isn't the first draft, but I mean, the first time going through, other people looking at it sometimes see things that if you're the one doing it, you don't see that right away. And so a fresh look sometimes brings up issues that you haven't thought of. So I don't think anybody's, yeah.
No, I appreciate that, everyone. I think that is why we took this last phase in the separate bundles. It means more meetings, but it also means we're going to get it right.
Right.
And I want to take the time to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councilor Zarella, go ahead.
So page 8, section 5, yard exceptions in residential districts. I think we should specify in a separate line, perhaps, that for ground-mounted solar systems specifically, there needs to be screening of the mount hardware. Tool sheds and patios and so forth are decorative at best and utilitarian at worst, but ground mount solar installations, particularly actual mounting frame, is frankly ugly from a neighbor's perspective. And I've had many neighbors tell me that when people try to put them in. So having some kind of hedges or screened fencing or something, not to the point where it blocks the sun, but to the base of the panels themselves, I think should be a requirement in residential districts.
And you mean for aesthetic purposes,
Yes.
not
yes.
functional? Okay.
Yep, and I think that would be something that we could have a line in there that requires it and delegate it to the planning board to approve screening plans, basically, as they do with many, many other things.
Okay.
They're very familiar with that, so.
Okay.
So that's that. Page 9, section 6, well, the whole thing is section 6, I guess, but 181.661, the purpose statement. I'd like to see us simply amend the word promote in the first sentence to provide for, because we're not actually looking to encourage large-scale solar facilities. We're just looking to make the option available. I think we are, at least I am, agnostic as to whether we should have more or fewer of them in the city. Then let's see, page 10 is fine. Page 11, the waiver provision, 181.665. The setback regulations specifically, the second sentence of this segment, referring to 181.666. I think there should be no setback waivers available in the rural residential district. In other words, if you're in the RR district, you cannot put this too close to your neighbor's property, even with a waiver. There's just, I just see no good reason for it. And if the option is available, then the planning board's going to be inundated with people asking for it.
So so you're asking that second section, second sentence be deleted?
No, I'm asking that language be added to the second sentence, excluding the rural residential district from its scope. So the planning board,
except in the rural residential district, comma, the planning board may waive.
right, you could put it that way, or you could put the planning board may waive the setback requirements in any area other than, however. But
Okay.
yes, exception language like that.
Okay.
All right.
Page 12.
I have a
Section-
question, Councilor Walsh, if I could.
I'll yield.
Yeah, Councilor Schultz, thank you, Councilor Zarella. Councilor Schultz?
I'm just wondering about your, Councilor Zarella, that you're zeroing on the rural residential only. Is the other residential, you don't think you should have some of these requirements that, I mean, they're going to be, these houses are much closer together than a lot of the houses in rural residential. Maybe you could clarify that for me. I'm a little, I don't really understand your thinking there. So you could, I appreciate
Councilor
it.
Zarella, please go ahead.
Certainly, back on page 8 at the beginning of this section, if you look at the table of uses, solar installations are already not permitted in any residential district except rural. And we do not allow use variances in rural districts. Okay. So basically, the only reason I've been focusing in on rural is because it's the only one where anyone could put one of these.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I missed that when we looked at that table. Okay, yeah.
No, I mean, the tables aren't intuitive. I know them just because I've been looking at them for 4 or 5 years on the zoning board and everything.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that clarification.
No problem at all.
All right, and I think we were on page 12, Counselor Zarella?
Yes, sections A and, or subparagraphs A and C of 181,667. They're titled lighting and utility connections.
Mhm.
And again, I think we should just have some language in there specifying that these two concerns ought to be assessed more stringently in the rural residential district. Particularly the light pollution issue for lighting of the systems for, I assume, maintenance purposes. In a commercial district or industrial, or even in the FSU district, we may be willing to tolerate some spillover of light pollution onto adjacent lots. But in the rural district, we really should be almost zero tolerance with that. So I don't know exactly how that should be worded, but, and with utility connections too. I'm gonna channel Councillor Boschman for a moment and
I
say
was
we
just
really
gonna
don't
say.
want those overhead wires going across someone's property to get to this solar facility.
I think that makes sense.
And again, that's something I have no strong preference as to how that's worded, and I don't expect us to deal with it tonight, but
Correct.
let's see. Page 14, paragraph D and E. Going in reverse order, in paragraph E, I think I believe Tom had mentioned there's already a process for this in some other section of the zoning that I don't usually deal with. So if we can adopt it from there, that's fine. But I think there should be some mechanism for the planning board to be permitted to dispute or reject the petitioner's estimate of cost, because as we all know, most of the engineers, especially operating in this area, are very diligent and conscientious. But we all know there are mercenary contractors out there who, if you tell them, I need you to cite me a price within this range, they'll give it to you if you pay them for it. So we need the planning board to be able to say, okay, you've provided us with this estimate of cost of removal, but we don't buy it. We think you're lowballing it. And then related to that, in paragraph D, I think we just need to add language at the end, and this is something I think we can actually do tonight, that just adds to the end of the final sentence, at the expense of the owner. So that it specifies that even if we exhaust the financial surety and we still have to pay to remove the installation, we have the option to go after the owner if it is cost effective for the city to do so.
I think that makes sense.
Also on page 14, near the bottom, the list of required findings. A couple things on those. One is just that they're not currently worded as mandatory findings, they're worded as project criteria. They just need to be tweaked so that they're actually in the language of mandatory findings. You know, find that such and such is true, as opposed to here's what you, the proponent of the project, need to do. But that's just a technical thing. I'm sure Vinny will catch that. But
Okay, I think I lost you. Page 14, required findings. I don't.
It's
181668 at the bottom of the page.
It's what we're looking at on the screen right now.
Oh, okay. I'm looking for a separate section. Okay, all right.
Oh yeah, it says make the following findings, and then it's got this list, and they're not
Okay.
actually worded as findings.
Okay, so just tweak the language so it actually looks like findings.
Right. Then substantively, I think we need to rework these required findings to either eliminate or at least augment the use of the terms minimize and maximize, because those are relative terms, and as currently worded, a petitioner could argue that if he has, for example, successfully minimized stormwater overflow or whatever, then he's entitled to his permit, even if the absolute amount of stormwater runoff that he's producing is still very high, as long as it's the minimum amount he can achieve.
So
I think we need to make it clear that there should be an absolute determination in there as well as to whether it is excessive.
So make the language more precise.
Right.
Okay.
And in particular, in 1816686, the second condition from the bottom,
yep.
We have minimize unreasonable land clearing. And I think that's, the language just doesn't parse right. If it's unreasonable, why are we allowing it at all? Minimum or otherwise. So I think we can just clean that up a little. Okay. Page 15. And yeah, this is the last page of this section, I think, that I've got comments on. Where we've got solar energy system large scale and solar energy system small scale near the top of the page.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, and also the first definition, large scale ground mounted solar voltaic facilities. We've got dual criteria, and it's not clear which one should take precedence. You've got it where it says 1750 square feet or more of surface area equivalent to a rated nameplate capacity of 250 kilowatts. So Tom and I were discussing this, and apparently that nameplate capacity is determined by square footage, so they'll always match up, but it's determined by square footage with current technology. So I think we really need to delete those parentheticals, or then get rid of the nameplate capacity section, or at least substantially reword it so that it's clear that if you have an active solar energy system that occupies less than 1750 square feet, but produces more than 250 kilowatts because it's just a new, more efficient system,
okay,
that you get the benefit of being a small scale solar energy system, irrespective of the fact that you're generating the same amount of power as a larger scale one.
Could we, excuse me, Counselor, could we just make this a general amendment to change the definitions so that they are all internally consistent?
Yes.
Okay.
And that would actually address the second and last thing as well, which is just that we have nameplate capacity, rated nameplate capacity, third definition from the bottom, defines itself in terms of a photovoltaic system, but then in other definitions, it makes it clear that a photovoltaic system is a subset of active solar energy systems. So then we're left with, but then we've got other definitions that reference nameplate capacity in reference to active solar energy systems. So I think we need to make it clear that those definitions have the same scope, basically. Right now we have a scoping issue where there are some things that are not covered by their own definitions.
Okay, so if we, excuse me again, and so if we just, if I hear you correctly, you're comfortable with changing the amendment to change the definition so all are internally consistent, and then I could just give an example of, for example, the parenthetical language in solar energy system large scale.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's something, I'll forward notes to the relevant people as if I catch any other examples.
Okay. All right.
And I think that's it on this subject.
Okay, there's an awful lot there. Councilor Schultz, did you want to separate anything from there, or are you comfortable with all of those
No, I'm
motions?
comfortable with including it all in one.
Okay, so I have a motion from Counselor Zarella. Do I have a second, Counselor
I'll
Schultz?
second it.
All right. And again, seeing no objections, we'll do this by unanimous consent. Okay.
All righty. We on to the last one now.
Oh, my goodness.
All right, so bear with me again as I'm trying to fix technology. Maybe I'll just talk through this one, not rely on the PowerPoint.
Okay.
The last bit is just to amend the definition section of the ordinance to add marijuana transporter, an entity not otherwise licensed by the Cannabis Control Commission that's licensed to purchase, obtain, and possess cannabis or marijuana products solely for the purpose of transporting, temporary storage, sale, and distribution to establishments, but not to consumers. This is basically a third-party transporter that delivers between cannabis cultivation facilities. Currently, we don't have it in our ordinance, and because of that, it's assumed it's prohibited. This merely adds it, establishes it as one of the marijuana establishments, which is allowed. They're referred to as MEs in our ordinance and are allowed in various districts.
Okay. Questions, counselors? Counselor Schultz?
I don't really have a question, but I have a comment, and I brought it up some time ago, one of our council meetings about using the term marijuana, and I did speak to our state rep-elect Mike Kushmerek this weekend to see if that, I had spoken to State Rep Steve Hay about seeing if we could change that language to cannabis, because we, as I said months ago, we have the Cannabis Control Commission, but we're still using the term marijuana. And the whole history of that term is just is negative, it's pejorative. So I was following up on that. So we can't do it. I'm sure it's not going to be passed now into Massachusetts state law that it's going to be cannabis, but I just want to make that comment. And I don't know if we could put it in parentheses after the marijuana current to actually use the technical term for the plant, but that's a suggestion I'd like to make.
Counselor Zarella?
I'll just, this is something Councilor Schultz and I discussed extensively at the time, and I respect his position considerably. I'll just echo my comments at the time, which is that I think if we were drafting law from the ground up, then that would be a very good change to make. But seeing as everywhere except in the title of the Cannabis Control Commission, all the state laws that we're sort of latching onto and pulling from for our language all reference marijuana, I think until they change it, we need to keep it the same, simply to ensure that we have consistency there, because in legal interpretation, when you use two different words, it's presumed that you mean two different things.
Right.
Even if you and I and everyone else knows that they're the same thing, someone is going to come up with some clever argument for why we didn't actually mean to adopt the standards that the state set because we use different wording. So again, I would have no objection at all to the state changing the nomenclature, and if it does so, I would then have no objection at all to us changing it throughout all our ordinances. In fact, I'd encourage it. But as long as the state keeps using marijuana, I think we have to keep using. That doesn't sound right. You know what I mean?
Well, I understand your point.
How about if we say using the term marijuana?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
There you go.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, Councilor Zarella. I just wanted to go on record saying I really would like to see that term go away, and
And I think, Councilor Schultz, we're pretty much all in agreement with you on that. Unfortunately, I think we're kind of between a rock and a hard place on that one. So but I think that now that Councilor Kushmerek is going to be Representative Kushmerek, that may be something that maybe we can spearhead to make that change.
Yeah, I would like to see it happen. I definitely would.
Yeah.
And I did speak to State Rep-elect Mike this week about it, so hopefully he'll follow up and we'll be able to do something eventually.
Okay. All right, any questions on this particular addition to the zoning? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second,
And again, seeing no objection, I will take this by unanimous consent. And I believe, Councilor Zarella.
Just something that I don't think we can address it tonight directly because I think we would have to kick it back to the planning board. And this is something I brought up with Tom, and I think we'll be addressing it in the next bundle anyway, but I'd like to put it in front of the committee for consideration. We're going to need to define residential district going forward because we have language in the zoning ordinance. This came up to me while I was doing work. And so we have language that says that you can issue a use variance, but not in a residential district, which is a good provision. We definitely want to keep that. But we currently don't have residential district defined. And the question was put to me at one point, is the neighborhood business district a residential district? The intention, I think, is no, it is not. But it's not really clear in the ordinance that residential district means all and only those districts which have residential in the name or whatever. So at some point, we're going to want to expressly define that. And I think it's an easy lift, but just something that we need to keep on our radar.
Right. I'll make a note of that in the minutes, Councilor Zarella, and then Mr. Skorowski will have that going forward.
And I just did want to, first of all, thank you all for bearing with me and really providing some thoughtful and helpful feedback. We'll definitely be working with Attorney Pusateri and the team at BSC to put together a revised model to bring to the council in January. One thing I just did want to draw your attention to again, so late January is bundle 2, late February is bundle 3, and then the intent is really to bring all of these bundles together for their readings on March 16th and April 6th, because we want to avoid like a Frankenstein zoning that is one thing in January, is one thing in February, is one thing in March. So to get to, the comment Councilor Zarella had made regarding the downtown business district, all of those things, that's the intent, is before it's put into an ordinance, we're really combining all this together. But anyway, that's all, and look forward to talking with you all about this more in January and February.
I have one question for you, Tom, and that is, in order to do that in the way that makes the most sense, and again, this is not on my shoulders, but going forward, what's the best way to handle, I mean, these are 3 separate bundles, but they're all one phase. What's the best way to handle those meetings so that it carries across the meetings? And because I know there are certain limitations on the number of days that things, have. And if you could maybe address that just a little bit.
No, good question. So when the city council opens a hearing on a zoning ordinance, they need to take action within 90 days. So were the council to open up the first hearing in January, I think it's January 18th,
right?
16th or 18th. 90 days out is April 19th. So I'm going to confer once again with Attorney Pusateri, but it's our understanding, at least at the moment, that were we to open January 18th and were we to go to its final reading April 6th, we would satisfy that 90-day window. And in the worst case scenario, if we did not, we could reopen a hearing and close it, and then we would have an additional 90 days. But I believe that the method we're following here should conform to 48 in that respect.
Okay. All right.
State law.
Thank you.
All right.
Sorry.
Go adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. This was really helpful. I want to thank you, Tom, for all of your hard work, and also for both counselors, Zarella and Schultz tonight. I know this was, a lot of detail, but I think that there are a lot of things that happened tonight that are going to be helpful going forward. So I appreciate everybody's hard work. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Tom.
we are adjourned, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.